Everybody, today's math lesson, April 3rd, 2020, we are going to practice multiplying and dividing with 1 and 0. So your assignment for today is to follow along and complete the class activity with us. And following the lesson, complete homework and remembering 7-14. So let's get started. All right, so first up on your class activity page, if you don't have it out, now is your time to get it out. We are going to start with exploring patterns with ones. If we look at this chart here, what patterns do we see below in this visual here? I want you to take a moment and think about it. What patterns do you notice? Maybe you notice how our answers are increasing or going up by 1. Maybe you notice our repeated addition keeps adding one number as they go on. Yeah, maybe you noticed over here that our squares are just circled by 1. Well, that would all be right because we are multiplying by 1. And when we do our count by ones, all we do is just a regular count. So as if we were counting 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and so on. So that's pretty easy to remember. When we multiply by 1, it is just counting up by 1. Now let's jump down here and explore patterns with zeros. What patterns do you notice on this visual? Maybe you notice how they are adding zeros together. If we have 1 times 0, we get 0, because that's like saying one group of 0. What about if we have 2 groups of 0? It's just 0 plus 0. So that pretty much tells us that anything times 0 will be 0. Now, I am going to have you pause and then take a look at this next slide. So I have kind of broken down the back page of our class activity to hopefully help you understand it a little bit better. With ones and zeros come different properties. So for multiplying times 1, we have the property for 1. That just tells us that anything times 1 is the number itself. So let's look at this first example here. 1 times 6. That's like saying one group of 6. We have 6 dots here in one group. And so what they're asking us for is how many there are in the one group, which would be 6. And that is why we get the answer 6. Okay? So let's look at the next one. We have 6 times 1. 6 groups of 1. If we look down at this visual down here, we have 6 groups marked by the green with 1 in each group. So now they want to know how many groups we have, and it shows 6. Therefore, showing our property for 1, anything times 1 is the number itself. Okay, so now that we have talked about the property for 1, let's look at the division rule for 1. The division rule for 1 is also kind of telling us a certain thing as well. When we divide, we're just breaking something into a certain number of piles. So our first number, our total, the biggest number, is called our dividend. What we are dividing by is called our divisor. So our divisor is how many groups we want to break this into. So let's look at our very first equation on top here. It says 8 divided by 1. I have the same thing down here, just with a different division symbol, but it means the same thing. So we have 8 total orange dots, and we want to break it into one group. What we're trying to find is how many orange dots are in our one group, which is 8. So let's look at our second equation here. We have 8, and we want to divide by 8. That means we want to break it into 8 groups. So I have a visual down here showing our groups in green. We have 8 orange dots broken into 8 groups. And how many orange dots are in each group? 1. Hopefully these visuals help you understand these a little bit better. So that's the division rule for 1. Now let's move on to zeros. This is where things might get a little bit tricky. So first of all, we have the zero property. When we multiply times 0, it is basically telling us that we are multiplying nothing. If we have 6 groups of 0, we're always going to get 0 because here the green is marking how many groups we have, but there's nothing in these groups, therefore meaning our answer will be 0. Turning it around, we have 0 groups of 6. There isn't a picture here because if we have 0 groups, that just means there's nothing there. Therefore, our answer has to be 0. Now this is where I want you to pay extra close attention. We have the division rule for 0. 0 divided by 6. That tells us that we have 0 dots and we want to divide it into 6 groups. Well, if we have 0 dots, that means we can't put them into any groups, so 0 groups. But if we have 6 divided by 0, that would mean that we have 6 dots putting into groups of 0. I want you just to listen very carefully. Let's think that we have a pizza. Okay, if we have a pizza and we want to put it into groups of 0, how would we be able to do that? Let's go back to when I talked about division. And I said to divide is to break something into a certain number of groups. And breaking something into groups of 0 just doesn't make any sense. So that is how we get the number or word impossible. So 6 divided by 0, anything divided by 0 is impossible because you can't break it into groups of 0. So hopefully this helped make a little bit more sense of these, and we'll get some practice in after this as well. So if you need, you can always come back and re-watch this slide. If you're looking at your class activity page, you will see this part at the top followed by the associative property of multiplication. So the associative property of multiplication tells us that when you group factors in different ways, the product stays the same. The parentheses tell you which numbers to multiply first. So anytime you see any type of a multiplication equation with more than 2 numbers, if it has parentheses, that automatically tells you that you have to multiply what's in the parentheses first. So they give us an example here. They have 3 times 2 times 5, but they have 3 times 2 in parentheses. That means that we have to do those 2 first. They put little arrows pointing down here just to tell you that 3 times 2 is 6. Then they just drop this 5 down so that it's on one line, and we take our product from these 2 numbers, 6 times 5, and 6 times 5 equals 30. Now, if we take those same numbers and put them in a different kind of multiplication equation, and have parentheses around different numbers, that might look a little different. So let's see how it works out. We have 3 times 2 times 5, just like over here, but our parentheses are in a different spot. This time, they're around the 2 times 5, so that means that we have to do that multiplication equation first. And 2 times 5 is 10. So they brought this 3 down, and now we have 3 times 10. And 3 times 10 equals 30. We got the same answer, didn't we? That is called the associative property. I'll say it again just to make sure. When you group factors in different ways, the product or answer stays the same. And this picture is just going to show us a little bit about that. These have different numbers, but it's telling us basically the same thing. This multiplication equation is 4 times 2 times 3. You can see it over here and over here. They're the same numbers, but the parentheses are around two different sets. And that makes our pictures look very different. So, what our pictures are showing us is, first of all, 4 times 2. So there's 4 groups of 2, and you can see that here. There's 1 group, 2 groups, 3 groups, 4 groups, and there's 2 in each group. So they want to do those first, and 4 times 2 equals 8. Okay, and then they bring this 3 down. Now what they're showing us in this equation doesn't quite match how this is, but it still makes sense. Either 8 groups of 3 or 3 groups of 8 using the commutative property. They're just showing us 3 groups of 8. So pretty much means the same things. And 8 times 3 or 3 times 8 is 24. So let's think about it over here. Now we have parentheses in a different place. This time we have our parentheses around 2 times 3, which means we need to do that first. 2 times 3 is 6. Bring our 4 down. 4 times 6, oops, it's got a little bit off here. 4 times 6 is 24. So it's the same product, the same answer, it's just shown and represented a little bit differently, just in a different way. And that is called the associative property. Factors are grouped in different ways, but the product is always the same. So now let's get out flip it over to the back of your class activity. And these may look similar, the properties and rules and our associative property of multiplication. So underneath here, they just want you to solve. We'll do a few together and then you can finish on your own and head over to the homework and remembering. So our directions right away say find each product. And for number 3, we have 2 times 6 times 1. But what numbers are in parentheses? That's right, 6 times 1, which means we need to do those first. And 6 times 1, using our property for 1, is 6. And we bring our 2 down. My computer's going to be a little slow here. That's all right. So we bring our 2 down, and we have 2 times 6. We know that anything times 2 is just that number, the other number doubled. So 2 times 6 is 12. All right, so once we are done, you may finish these. Let's jump down to our first word problem. Again, our directions are solve each problem, and we're on number 9. Follow along with me, please. Sean gave 1 nickel to each of his sisters. If he gave away 3 nickels, how many sisters does Sean have? Well, now this we just need to think about. If he gave 1 nickel to each of his sisters, and if he gave 3 nickels away, I'm just going to draw 3 nickels here, 3 pretend nickels. We'll say those are our nickels. So he gave 3 away, and he gave 1 to each of his sisters. So we'll just say, put an arrow pointing to that sister, and to this sister. So how many sisters must he have? 1, 2, 3. He must have 3 sisters. Let's see if I can write sisters with my mouse right here. Sisters. Sometimes on word problems, you just need to take it step by step and draw it out. All right, got a little bit off the line, but it'll work. So you may go on and you may finish each of these problems and then head over to the homework and remembering. Please let me know if you have any questions.